there, welcome back to the show. Today I'm going to talk about 2001 in 4K. Here's a little thing, little box. I have the box set and the booklet stuff as well in it. So you get the 4K disc, and you get the Blu-rays as well. And you get a nice little booklet. It's very nice, lots of pictures, lots of production design, and you get little cards as well in this. But most importantly, you get the film, and that's what I'm really talking about today. Is the film itself, 2001. This nice little back cover. Now, 2001 is one of my favourite films. I'm a massive Kubrick fan, and I should go over here. I'm a massive Kubrick fan. 2001 was one of the first films I saw from Kubrick. It blew me away. And the 4K is beautiful. The 4K I rewatched last week, and it is a stunner. And it kind of is one of those films that brings you back to your first viewing of 2001. Because it's so precise that it really brings you back to the emotion of first seeing the film. Which is why I'm going to talk about it. I've read another video about 2001. We look back and I'll pin it to this video. So I'm not going to be doing a whole in-depth look at it because I've already done it. I'm just doing this video as a go watch it in 4K. If you've got 4K, see this in 4K. Explain why. Basically, the precision of the imagery is just astonishing. Because you get the everything really clear detail. Like in the models, you get all these weird shadows you never saw before. And in every sequence, everything seems much more pristine and detailed, and everything, the world feels much more in your face, and in a really cool way, which makes you much more invested. Because I think 2001 is one of those films that really suffers a lot on TV. It really does. I mean, the three viewings I've had of it that I really enjoyed the most was my first viewing of it because I didn't know what was going to happen. My first cinema viewing, which because you see it in the cinema, and this viewing because it brought me back to my first experience where the pacing of it felt different because you're seeing everything very exactly and very precisely in a way that you couldn't before. Like you could see the stars and details that you could never see before unless you saw it in the cinema. You could see the way people move within the frame in a more clear detail. And it really was important because it set the world up a lot more. And it set up why Kubrick was doing certain things within the film a lot more. So the film felt more immediate. Because it's an epic film, but it's only 2 hours 20, really. I mean, there's a prologue, musical prologues, an interlude, but if you take them off, that's it. It's 2 hours 20. And it really works because the pacing actually is pretty fast, even though there's not much of a story. So there is a story, it's just a very simple story on the surface. But what this film in 4K does now is it allows you to really be invested in the story in a way which is very hard when you're watching a DVD or a Blu-ray where you're not getting all the information visually that you really need. You're not seeing the background details, you're not seeing the foreground details of what everything been done. And when it goes to silence or when it goes to darkness, it doesn't have the same effect. And that's why 4K is so good, is the effect it has on you. One thing I've been finding is with speakers and with the 4K image, I'm much more invested in the film. And it's really because your attention can see much more. There's much more to see. Your attention is much clearer about the rhythm of the film in a way that you don't really get unless you've actually seen it on the big screen. So we're getting much closer now with 4K to getting a image that, if it's a good transfer of course, an image that actually delivers the cinema experience a lot more because it's much more precise what you're seeing. I'm not sure I'm explaining this really well, but what I can say is every section felt cleaner on 4K like the movement between the opening sequence was much more understandable what was going on to start with. I mean, an opening sequence, really what happens is the you're with the Moonwatcher who has tribe. They get thrown away, taken away from the water supply by another group of apes who are or pre-humans basically who are just learning to they're trying to adapt in Africa where everyone's starving basically. So basically, one tribe's going to survive, another tribe won't. The Moonwatcher gets visited by the monolith. The monolith puts the imagery of hunting into their head, and they come back, and they basically learn to hunt, to kill an animal, to feed, to get stronger. Then they go back and get the water supply back by beating the hell out of these other apes and killing a few of them, and other apes just run away. So they are going to be the surviving genetic line that will go forward. And that's all it is. It's very simple. But unless you see it in the cinema, where it feels very clear what's going on, when you're watching the video, I think a lot of time you're just seeing apes jumping around. And it's like, this is very interesting, but I'm not feeling much narrative tension here. Because it's just a bunch of apes jumping around. And it's really beautiful looking. But I don't feel like I really need to follow what's going on precisely. And the 4K actually makes it much easier to understand what's going on. Because you see everything more clearly, you can see the little movements more clearly. And it's much easier to follow the story. Which is strange to say because there was never a very ambiguous story. But it's more impact and it's very clear where everything's going. And your ability to get information feels clearer the way you would when you're watching it in the cinema. Or the first time you try to work out what's going on. Then we do the jump to the future when you're seeing the image above me. It looks beautiful, it looks stunning, and that's always a sequence I could happily watch by itself, no matter what else. And it looks just gorgeous in 4K. 4K, it really jumps out. It's funny how, and now I found in this viewing it cut quicker and leaner between that atmosphere and the plot, because the plot just now, which is the same thing I felt in the cinema, was the plot is funnier because it's really about these guys trying to establish control over a situation. They don't really have that much control over. They've discovered their way into the planets, but they still look insecure and weird with all these weird formalities. And they have evolved from the apes, but they still feel as insecure in their way of the world. Within the world, they're in a situation where there's potential war between the Russians and the Americans over certain little things. They're still fighting the tribes. And they've got their pomposity, but they seem to lack direction. And that comes across a lot more from seeing the beauty of what they've got amidst their own boredom with their achievements and their own inabilities to deal with their achievements. And deal with space in a way that is appropriate to the wonder of space. So it's another scenario of society that's moved on, but it's now kind of hit an edge where it can't move on anymore because it's collapsed into this kind of boredom. So what other landscape is there? And then basically we get the plot of the monolith. And again you see these people, these two astronauts with how it feels much more compressed now. Seen in 4K, seeing all the details, it feels much more compressed thriller, that section, rather than... One of the problems the house had in DVD with 2001 was everything felt very samey. It felt like you were watching a film, there was no differentiation, even though I know there was meant to be. I mean, there's plot sections, but everything kind of seemed to have been remastered the same. So it was very samey. So I wasn't sure if it was maybe a remaster or what, but it just felt like visually it never seemed to click in for me. There'll be a note sure, because from seeing it in the cinema, I know that really I should be experiencing something more than I actually was. So maybe it was a transfer, maybe it was just the technology wasn't there to actually show this film the way it needed to be shown, just with the colours and the detail. Then finally, we get to the Stargate sequence after the wonderful suspense. And one of the weird things was, like, when the suspense comes, it's much more immediate. In 4K in the cinema, it's much more immediate. It's like someone now suddenly realizing they have to live on their instincts in a way that they never did before. And I think sometimes on DVD, you don't feel that as much. It's just still a guy going through the motions of trying to survive. But it's much more impactful now when you get to the trying to go back in the ship where there's lots of these dreads and I'm trying to turn off Hal. It becomes a much more emotional experience. And scene to scene, it feels much more like it's building towards something really emotional, but you can't quite work it out. It's like one of the really cool things with 2001 is you're never quite sure where the hell it's going ever. It is this feeling of surprise, constant surprise. Even though everything seems kind of bland on the surface, there's lots of stuff going below the surface. And I think what was lost in some of the other transfers was the idea that what's going below the apparent cover story and the cover lack of emotion. Quite you see much more details, you can place everything more in context, and it feels much more like it's steamrolling ahead a bit more. And the pauses for silence, the pauses for nothing seeming to happen actually have an impact. It's like, I'm meant to be looking at this and what's going on rather than this feels similar to what I've just seen, you know. I think the 4K really helps 2001. Not just intellectually, but also just the emotion of what you're seeing as you're watching the film. Then finally we go to Stargate, which is another astonishing sequence as Bowman survives from Hal. And what's great is you go from the last 40-50 minutes pretty much is Bowman trying to survive Hal on his own. You're then taking Hal's memories out and turning them off. And then you go straight to the Stargate as they arrive at Jupiter and you go into the Stargate sequence. So it feels like an exciting inner world of the evolution of man. It's like man finally figuring it out that he needs to try and find some other purpose for life rather than just tribalism and his own insanity. He needs to find something else. Like Hal's kind of almost like a side effect of his own tribalism. Like the madness of Hal is basically man's fault, probably. You find out in the sequel, or the Arthur C. Clarke theory, how Hal went mad. There's all the secrets, really. But it doesn't really matter. It's just, you get a feeling from this film about why he went mad is because of just the general insanity and tribalism that's under the surface. And it's always been parodied in the sequence on the moon, just how important they think they are when they're really not that important. And how fragile they look. And then when you go into the sequence going to Jupiter, you see how fragile mankind is, despite all the technology, how fragile they are, and how the bone that gets thrown in the start looks like the Discovery spaceship. So they're still moving on the same old tools. They just don't know it yet. And it's just this kind of dark comedy with mankind. It's also very moving because it's also involved. I mean, Kubrick always gets called cold, but he's not. He's just a director who's distanced a little bit. But you still feel the emotion, especially in these new transfers. You feel the emotion a lot more just because the colour scheme's better and you feel the intercutting of imagery and the music feels much more like you're watching what the director intended because there is a lot more variation than earlier transfers would have had. Which basically leads, by the time we get to the end, I just feel like I was exhausted watching this thing. In a good way, because it felt really moving and really emotional. When you get to Star Child sequence at the end, after going through the Stargate, the Star Child comes out looking over Earth, which doesn't tell you exactly what's going to happen next to mankind. It just suggests something beautiful and interesting. And it's like, what are we going to be in the future? It's an ambiguous image because we are kind of starting from scratch again in some way, trying to see the universe in a different way. But what is it going to be? And it's a beautiful image, a beautiful idea. It's like, yeah, we maybe can be actually going to put down our worst instincts, or maybe we're going to another level of replacing the instincts with something else. And where will that lead us? And there'll be another set of tools we have to eventually put down. It's almost like what are the tools to survive for mankind in life, and when did it become a liability, and how do we move forward from that? So there's a lot of questions in the film that we haven't actually answered all for ourselves since the film has been made. It's like questions of who are we and what are we and how are we going to survive and how are we going to move on from our own liabilities at the moment. I hope I've kind of interested you in watching 2001 in 4K, because it is a beautiful film in 4K. It does feel so much more emotional, at least it did for me. But it looks beautiful. It really looks beautiful. It's one of the best transfers I've seen. It looks absolutely gorgeous. And it just feels much more immediate again. And I know it's starting to Shining as well, and I watched The Shining. It felt much more immediate. Like, I guess the scene that without the faded colours that you sometimes get in. Well, it's just faded, but it's just that there wasn't enough technology. The technology wasn't there to actually put it in disc, and there wasn't enough bit rate really to make some of this imagery that was shot actually come across to you. And it's just wonderful. It's a wonderful film, a masterpiece, and this 4K really brings up why it's a masterpiece. So that's one of the reasons why I say go see it. It's like, it's probably the first time since seeing it in cinema that I actually felt like it was 2001 the way I wanted to see it. Rather than, it's almost there, it's a good film, it's a great film, but I'm not quite seeing the way I remember it. Now it's like, oh, and that is why I love 2001. So that's me. Hopefully I haven't blathered on too much. I probably have. Okay, well that's me for now anyway, so I'll leave you there. Right, bye.